Okay, comrades, welcome everybody to this meeting. This is obviously one of the most important topics we could be discussing because the world has taken a really quite a major step into the unknown. We have a situation where, uh, much to the surprise of many people, and certainly of the previously ruling clique in USA, Donald Trump has won the leadership, has won the presidency, and we uh, one of the questions that has to be asked is, what does this does this is Trump a fascist, as he's often been called? Does it mean the beginning of a real dark age in U.S. history and in world history? Is the USA descending into chaos? Is it descending into civil war in the period ahead? To what extent is the major split that is widening in the ruling circles in the USA? What does that? What is the connection of that, or the relationship of that, to the declining global power of the USA in the world? A crucial question for us as workers, as trade unionists, is what role can the organised labour movement play in resisting the attacks from a particularly vicious face of the ruling class? What are the prospects for the birth of an independent workers' party? And we could have had no better comrade to open up a discussion on this subject than Comrade Jack Gerson, who is a veteran trade unionist, an activist and socialist theoretician over several decades, and we're particularly grateful to him for agreeing to come and speak to us today. And I'll hand over to him. Jack, if you could speak for about maybe 20, 25 minutes. And of course, as is usual in our meetings, we'll then go over to discussion. I'd also like to particularly welcome a number of US comrades who are here, who joined us today as well. Okay, so comrade, when you're ready.
Yeah, I'm ready now. Thank you, Roger. It's good to see comrades I haven't seen in some time. It would take probably about 25 hours to address all the questions that Roger just put forward. And it's a good thing that I only have 20 minutes because I am very interested in what others have to say from the US, especially also around the world. I've been out of things for a while. I had chemotherapy and major surgery this year, and I've only recovered recently within the past few weeks. So what I'm going to do is to try to hold this as short as I can, but because I'm verbose, it'll probably go the full 20 minutes. Don't let me go any longer than that. Um, and I want to begin by noting that maybe the most important point that can be addressed, and maybe others will, is what can be done and what is being done now. What is going to be done by the misogynists and racists and so on, empowered by Trump, and what is going to be done in response and how to build a response. And I'll note that yesterday there were several demonstrations in the U.S. against, in defense of immigrants' rights and abortion rights, including very large ones in New York City for immigrants' rights, including many immigrants, and in Washington, D.C. for abortion rights. I think it's also important to be prepared to act on the local level to defend against possible attacks, and I would say probable, there'll almost certainly be some, and there may be many, by the forces that are enabled and empowered by Trump, the the woman hating, the sexual predator, oozes, and the racism, which has been in his family for generations and which he also exudes. It's more than just dog whistles, I think, but it's certainly, many of those. So I think one thing I've thought of is the defense of abortion clinics 30, 32 years ago when Operation Rescue came to major cities and attacked clinics, throwing blood on women trying to get into the clinics, holding up big posters of bloody fetuses as they physically attempted to block, entry by attacking and knocking down or worse in various instances. And many of us, defended those clinics every weekend when Operation Rescue would come to our local clinic. Several went, including me, went and actually several times had to fight physically against them. I think such defense of abortion clinics, women's centers, immigrants' rights, and immigrant centers, and so on, is something to be prepared for. And that building such defense, on a local level, I think is important on how to begin to fight back. Also, the major, rallies, marches, and so on, such as took place yesterday, are important, and those two should be linked. And in terms of what organizing labor, that's one of the things, is to go to local unions, raising, not only support and rubber stamp motions, but demanding resources, both material and physical, and that should be taken to the broader bodies, to the statewide and national federations, who frankly have at best sat on their hands and worse, for throughout. So I want to make that point first, because much of what I'm going to say, I think, is going to be directed at the elite, the Democratic Party centered elite and their strategy, which has led to the current defeat. And this is not something which occurred overnight. This has been building. This has been building for decades. The Democratic Party, first of all, was never a working class party, but for some decades, from FDR through LBJ, you had a coalition which had a moderate social welfare New Deal program, coupled with a bloc with the worst, segregationist racists who dominated the Democratic Party and ran it in the South. As soon as the civil rights movement forced the Democrats off of that position, that apparatus in the South went intact to the Republican Party, and the Democrats in turn started abandoning their moderate welfare state, social democratic approach, and that became extremely clear, if it wasn't already, when the neoliberal trilateralist Carter and Brzezinski were in power in the late 1970s. It should have been clear to all when the Clintons came in, and Bill Clinton was, basically openly, championing deregulation, privatization, and a turn away from programs, which were oriented to trying to retain or even expand a working class base. Someone needs to mute.
Let me mute. Who's that? Okay, sorry, carry on, Jack. Yep.
Okay, so turning away, from a working class base and turning to urban professionals, and increasingly to suburbanites, and more recently, to the Never Trumpers as they appeared. And so I'm going to because it's early, and because I want to hear what other people have to say, especially, I'm going to read a few emails that I sent, one before and a couple since. The uh, the election, about what I think is represented. So first, to queries I got from a Italian friend about what was going on a week or so before the election, I wrote, the presidential election is a contest between a narcissistic, egomaniacal, erratic, authoritarian hustler, Trump, and an ambitious former prosecutor who's deliberately vague about most things, the better to reinvent herself as she changes positions opportunistically, parenthetically, changing from an opponent of fracking to a proponent of fracking, changing from a proponent of Medicare for all, universal health care, state provided, to an opponent of that, or at least against it. And this individual, Harris, doesn't appear to stand for anything except being joyful, for quote unquote decency, and being quote unquote better than Trump, who she labels a fascist, and she will save democracy. I do think that Trump, if elected, will try to impose harsh policies in an authoritarian manner. Given his short attention span, I think the real dangers will come from J.D. Vance and his mentor Peter Thiel, from Elon Musk, from Steve Bannon, a professed basically fascist himself, who wants to smash the state, but not to replace it with workers' councils and rule. Stephen Miller, the deportation czar et al. They might well be operationally in charge during the second Trump term in office, but then again, Trump during his first term couldn't stand the thought of anyone else getting credit for anything. Hence, he booted Steve Bannon out early on in his first term because he felt Bannon was getting too much credit in the media. Whatever the specifics, Trump is liable to do more damage in the second term than in his first, and he did major damage in his first term, packing the courts, resulting in overturning Roe v. Wade and in an almost rubber-stamped Supreme Court. In the second term, Trump would be especially hard on immigrants. He'd probably de facto support Putin in Ukraine, hail the Israeli far right, be a climate change denier for sure, turn the planet and ecosphere over to the fossil fuel industry, etc., and maybe worse. He's threatened to jail his opponents, call out the army to disperse protests, etc. And Trump will almost certainly follow through in his promises to right-wing billionaires to make big cuts to taxes on capital gains, wealth, and income. And I should note that Musk, who now appears to have tremendous influence after having bailed the Trump campaign out financially by donating over $100 million, is very influential. And Musk wants to cut federal spending by a third. If that is done, that is going to, that combined with a beg thy name a trade war, which Trump, at least verbally, is inviting, can throw the world into depression. There's this cutting federal spending by a third, and they're not likely to cut defense spending much, if at all, probably not at all, is going to mean severely harsh austerity cuts, were that to happen. But what they say they're going to do and what they do are not necessarily the same thing, and a fight back again. I was muted for some reason. Okay. So what of Harris? She'll be the soft alternative, at least domestically. Like Biden, she'll probably make a big show of opposing the most excessive demands of the fossil fuel giants, while in practice giving them license to profit grossly and to continue to despoil the planet. Note that under Biden, the U.S. is the world's leading producer and exporter of fossil fuel. Harris has already fallen into line by abandoning her former opposition to fracking. On immigration and the border, she'll express empathy and make a few gestures, but will probably continue Biden's immigration policy in practice, a policy not that much different than Trump's was in his first term, minus Trump's racist rhetoric and display behavior about the wall. Now, I should note, by the way, in terms of the deportation threats, that the deporter in chief title, that was Obama's, who deported 2 million. Bill Clinton turned back the Haitian refugees trying to reach the U.S. by boat. So this is not new. That doesn't mean that it won't be worse, and it can be significantly worse. But this has been a policy, of the Democratic elite that's been running the country for many years. Now, Harris is likely to continue Biden's hard line on China, including tariffs, were she elected, not so different from Trump's policies in his first term. So as far as Israel and wars are concerned, Trump and Harris will likely in practice have similar policies of arming and defending Israeli barbarism. The Israeli tail is now wagging the U.S. imperialist dog in that region. I do think the threat of widespread international wars would be, if anything, greater under Harris than under Trump. Trump's a reflex right-wing isolationist, his admiration of hardliners like Putin, Orban, Bolsonaro et al. Notwithstanding. It's not without reason the Democrats have been labeled the party of war for much of the last century. That was before, a week before the election. Subsequent to it, I wrote, the re-election of Donald Trump represents a rejection by a majority of the working class and majority of the rural population against the political and cultural elite that's led the country, at least since the election of Bill Clinton in 1992. And that elite's been organized around the Democratic Party, led by the Clintons, the Obamas, the congressional leadership, and so on. Trump's victory represents a decisive, although perhaps temporary, perhaps more long-term defeat of the Democratic Party and that elite, which is going to have to undergo some serious thinking about what went wrong and why. And already they formed a circular firing squad, to fix blame. So, which maybe at this time I'll get to. The Democratic Party represents a pro-capitalist party and not a party of the working class. So the political strategy refusing to support, vote, or organize for that party, I think, has been vindicated once more. And I believe also, and this may be controversial, the Democrats' defeat reveals the bankruptcy of identity politics, which puts the government in the position of openly supporting some sectors of the population against others. And that's the way that those politics played out. And as should be obvious, this created a wide lane for a demagogue like Donald Trump to exploit and manipulate the legitimate grievances of those so inaccurately and unfairly labeled as oppressors. And more recently now, we're finding that all kinds of Democratic strategists are suddenly revealing that that they think that the Democratic Party has approached the working class in an arrogant and condescending way, has offered almost nothing to people who are struggling to get by, and that's a major reason for the defeat. It certainly is a major reason for the defeat. I don't want to underplay, the misogyny and racism of Trump and the fact that some of the vote certainly represents that. I don't think that's the bulk. I don't think that's the reason why he won. And frankly, had Trump not won, and even had Hillary Clinton won in 2016, that would just have obscured the fact that there's been a rejection building for decades of the have-nots who feel abandoned, as they see the Democrats going directly to the haves, of people who were told, follow the advice of Taylor Swift and be impressed when Megan Thee Stallion twerks as she tells you to vote for Harris. And as Tim Walz acts like a jackass jumping up and down. And that's supposed to be a regular guy appealing to working people. That's the image of working people that's put forward. It assumes that working people and the rural population are morons, who are easily led by the nose by this cultural elite, rather than who put forward very little for them. And I believe that is a major reason that much of the rejection, in fact, of the of the Democrats was not, some of it were, some voted, went to Trump as an alternative, desperately hoping, that he'll provide something. And many just sat out the election. Part of it, although not, I don't think a major part, but part of it certainly was the essentially position of the Democrats towards the Arab Americans in Michigan. I don't know if people have seen these figures. In Dearborn, Michigan, where fewer than 50,000 people voted, Biden carried Dearborn by 17,400 votes in 2020. Trump carried it by 2,600 votes. That's a heavily Arab American population. That's a shift of 20,000 votes in a battleground state with a very thin margin. The Green Party candidate, Jill Stein, who gets very few votes anywhere, got 18% of the votes, 7,600 votes in Dearborn. That's an indication, one of the factors. There were several factors, that are involved in what happened. But certainly, the open, the arming of the Israelis and open support for genocide, enabling of it, certainly is one, and certainly antagonized and alienated the entire virtually Arab American population. So one more. So I've talked about the elite centered in the Democratic Party. It interacts with and increasingly incorporates, though, many of the leading deep state operatives. While it's centered on the Democrats, it absorbs some of the old Republican establishment as well. Thus, the vocal and written support for Harris from so many past and present intelligence operatives, diplomats, retired generals, and from former leaders of the pre-Trump Republican Party establishment, including Liz Cheney, John Bolton, the bulk of the never-Trumpers, and even Dick Cheney's emerged from the depths to affirm his membership in the elite. John Bolton and Dick Cheney used to be presented, and especially Cheney, as the face of fascism in the U.S. 20 years ago, Cheney was vilified. Now he's the defender of democracy and welcome, by the Democrats and the Harris campaign. So this is an indication, I think, of why many reject it and don't believe, and see through the hypocrisy of the Democrats. Okay, many of those who voted for Trump tell interviewers they don't think Trump is a good person. They think he has terrible character, that he is a racist, that he is a woman hater, but he's speaking to their economic needs. And they don't believe that Harris will do anything but perpetuate their situation where they can't make ends meet, where they're victims of inflation, which is hitting the have-nots much harder than the haves. The housing prices, that inflation is 24% over Biden's term. Food, groceries have gone up 22%. People can't make ends meet and they're desperate. And there's tremendous uncertainty made much worse by, the increasing number of natural disasters, the wars around the world, and so on. People are feeling frightened, insecure, and some of those people are hoping desperately that this used car salesman at best will this time not take them for another ride. And also, in uncertain times, people, and we've seen this around the world, and you've certainly seen it in Europe, look to authoritarians, look to someone in a scary world who's going to make things secure, who is the strong person. And so there's a tendency, if there's no alternative, to look to strongmen, and there has been no alternative. And I think that's, critical. There's been no alternative presented by labor movement and by much of the left in the U.S. to to what Donald Trump is offering, what Donald Trump and his supporters have been offering. And so people, have either chosen to sit it out, about 15 million or so did, and some chose to vote for Trump. Okay. On the question of whether Trump is a fascist, how
Sorry,
much time?
just to let you know, you've had about 20 minutes, but I'm not trying to cut you short.
Okay, I don't want to continue. I want other people to talk. Let me have 2 minutes, and because I think it's important to talk about what Trump has said he'll do. But I think most people know that. You all have access and have read, I'm sure, and may know as much as I do about his promises, which have been out there in the open. What he has said he's going to cut and what he actually does depends on the fight back. Finally, I do not think that Trump himself is a fascist, but rather a highly individualist and dangerous authoritarian. But that doesn't mean there isn't a danger of fascism. I believe that those, around him, especially Steve Bannon, Stephen Miller, and even I'd say Elon Musk and J.D. Vance are capable. Trump has had every opportunity to organize a fascist party. He hasn't done so. Some of these individuals may. I'm going to stop there. There's a lot more to be said, and I hope other people say it.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that introduction, Jack. I know there's the number of comrades will certainly want to speak and to ask questions. I think I'd like to give priority if they want to. There are several comrades from the USA here if they'd like to add anything. If not, Ian has his hand up. Perhaps Ian, if you'd make your point, and then other comrades can consider if they want to come in. Joel is also got his hand up, so he'll be next.
Well, lights are terrible here. Sorry. Just a couple of quick observations to get the ball rolling at this stage. I'm not happy that Trump won. I'm not even per se, in and of itself, happy that Harris lost. She seems to be a pretty nothing politician in some ways. But I'm very, very happy that Dick Cheney's endorsement wasn't seen to swing the election on one of the last points that the Speaker made, especially that the endorsement of Dick Cheney didn't trump, pardon the pun, the unendorsement of the Arab American community, whose the murder of whose families in Gaza was being triangulated around in the way that the destruction of other parts of the Democrat Party's basis jobs was being triangulated around to try and get suburban Republicans to fill the gap, as if there's more rich people than poor people in the United States. So it was a terrible campaign. I think every campaign since 2008, the Democrats have moved significantly to the right. There was all the Obama hope and change stuff. That turned out to be a complete con as well. 8 years later, he hadn't even closed Guantanamo, which he could do by executive order. 2012 was a pretty normal centre-left, centre-right campaign. Then there was the shock of Trump getting in. And then Trump only lost, I think, because one, COVID, and two, the fact he was an incumbent. And also Black Lives Matter, all those things came together. And as the speaker said, this time round, his vote actually went down, Trump's, not by much. It held up, but it wasn't any higher. Whereas the Democrat vote cratered. And the kind of Hillary Clinton pro-imperialist liberalism that had been building up more and more, the more and more the Republican Party, for whatever reasons, rhetorically, or because there was an internal party reaction to being the invaders of Iraq, in their case under Bush, just like in this country it was under the Labour Party and Blair, and there was the Corbyn revolt against that. The Democrats doubled down on being the party of the national security elite, as they were deserting the Republicans. And it became almost like what I dreaded if there'd been a Hillary Clinton Marco Rubio contest in 2016, if you remember him. That time it was two people who agreed about pretty much everything but abortion, given how bad Hillary was on foreign policy and economics. This time there was some idiosyncrasies from Trump, but the Democrats made the campaign all about abortion. But it wasn't enough when the other guy was making it about the economy and saying that he'd end the wars. The Where there were abortion referenda, now that Roe v. Wade's been cancelled and it's been sent back to the states, I saw some statistics that the pro-choice vote was leading Harris by sometimes double digits. And perhaps particularly in those states, people thought that they could do that and still not have to vote for the Democrat because that one issue was on the ballot separately. Sorry, that's a whole range of different things that I've put out there, longer than I thought. But just one last thought to end on. Could any Democrat now say with a straight face that we're better off than we would have been coming to the end of a second term of Bernie Sanders? And more pointedly, can any Bernie Sanders official left style person say with a straight face that we're better off in this election for them not having challenged Biden and having actually supported him even after the establishment started to shift, and then not challenging Harris? I think, as you said at the end of your presentation, the absence of a left has been pretty decisive in all of this, and we can't just let it keep drifting further and further in that way. Thanks.
Thanks, Ian. Joel.
Okay, let me turn on my video too. Watching the election, the election night coverage, there's several swing states that Kamala Harris lost by with significantly less votes than Biden had got in his last election campaign. You watch the way the media spun it, talking about that she lost a certain percentage of suburban voters. Pennsylvania was one of the states that they were counting on to get those electoral votes. And then there was Michigan, Wisconsin, and Arizona that came along later. And in all of those cases, the spin was always, well, they could have appealed to this section of suburban professional workers that work outside Pennsylvania. They could have appealed to Black men more, this identity group or that identity group. Very much the way it was put out as the reason why she lost various percentages that were key in those swing states. And I very much agree with the statement that Sanders put out a day or two after, that when we're talking about a working class vote, it's not just the white working class. We're talking the working class is it's Black, Latino, Asian. It's all these different things. Even if you watch some of the more progressive kind of media outlets, Democracy, they talk about the white working class versus this, that, or the other group, as if it's some kind of identity group. And then somebody else in the Democratic Party establishment shot back and said that Sanders' statement was BS because they claimed that, and they very much did, the Democratic Party made this concerted effort to appeal to unions with having Sean Fain of the auto workers come out at the rallies, different conventions. And what they're harping on is the trade unions, basically the established trade unions, the big ones, the UAW. When you look at it, unions only represent 11% of the workers in the United States. So if we're going to appeal to the working class and economic issues thereof, it needs to be a broader appeal, which is something we lack here. The Democrats have been lacking for a long time. They cannot just appeal to people who are already in unions. That's a very small group, and that's what they did. Trump's tariff war, he's explaining this in very vulgar terms, which has already been backed up by Biden during his administration on solar panels and EV cars. It's very much misunderstood. And then you see the same thing with the Democrats. They explain what's going on with inflation by saying that this is part of some corruption kind of phenomenon. They could, price gouging, instead of just, explaining that, well, if you have a supply chain crisis and there's less of a certain good, of course a store is going to charge more for that. That's basic economics. It's not some kind of, they want to create these new terms like greedflation. It has nothing to do with the way capitalism actually even works. So they're not appealing to the broader. They're not even giving workers a chance to understand what economics is. They just want to make these boogeymen out of certain people and make people afraid and get them to vote for it based on these buzzer kind of mentality. On the question of whether Trump is a fascist and what we can expect, generally speaking, I'm sort of, I think Trump maybe was tending towards fascism at one time himself, but I think definitely, yes, people like J.D. Vance, Bannon would be more of the sort that would implement something like that. As far as what the Republicans could do, there needs to be a 2/3 majority in either house to amend the Constitution. They could certainly pass laws to increase military spending or budgets for the border, different kinds of budgets, but to amend the Constitution, there's going to be this ongoing back and forth, probably for most of the administration. And you're going to see a shift probably in military spending away from Ukraine, Russia, and towards Israel. Although Zelensky has already come, to make an appeal to Trump, it's generally speaking going to be going in that direction. And as far as war in general, I think that the left in the United States needs to make a connection more when we say that, we are against genocide, that has to do also with what's going on in the United States. And you only really see the independent candidates like Kennedy who oppose war on the basis of we just need to tighten our belts and get our situation together within the United States. But the anti-war movement, which is mainly on college campuses and among students, tends to have this message only of we are opposed to war because it's inhumane to others. Not that that's not true, but we need to connect that with what's going on here. I've tried to do that in my union, ILW. It's got so far as my local, and but that's a problem we have in the United States. The unions are smaller, and then we don't have the ability to make these connections between war and inflation, what's going on here. So I leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Joel. And Eric, also from the USA. And if there's nobody else who's actually wanting to speak in the immediately, I'd like to just put my hand up to ask a few questions, really, which I hope the US comrades will be able to answer. But yeah, Eric, no, you come in first, sure.
Oh, I hope I didn't jump the line. Thank you. Thank you, Jack, for the talk. I don't want to repeat any of the points that are.
Oh. Eric, we seem to have lost you. Okay, well, perhaps while Eric, are you there? Can you hear me? Okay, if it's okay with the other comrades, I'd like to make a few points. I see that Finn has his hand up. Finn, do you want to go first, and then I'll speak later?
It's up to you, Roger. Yeah,
Carry on, yeah.
Yeah, I'll make a few points which I'd like the American comrades to comment on, and then a couple of specific questions. First of all, I think there's nothing to be gained now but looking at if the Democrats had done this, had done that, if Harris had done this, had done that, if you hadn't backed Biden. I mean, that argument is finished. The thing we're facing now is to replace the Democrats, get rid of the Democratic Party as any representative of a progressive force in America. That's number one. And this is day one, starting to build a new alliance of progressive forces in America, a combination of unions, of community groups, of organizations such as, well, they've lost influence now with the Black Lives Matter, the oppressed sections of society, which would include Latinos and Black and Asian people, gay and lesbian people. There has to be an alliance of all these forces to form a real opposition to Trump and the government and take our gaze off the Democrats. They have failed and they will continue to fail. They're just a capitalist party representing business interests. Likewise with Trump. What is true, he's a misogynist, a vile individual, a very vulgar creature, a very insulting and crass individual. But it's pointless going on about that. The government has not to be opposed in the way we'd oppose any right-wing government. This isn't the first right-wing government we're facing in the countries across the globe. So we need to confront the government as you would any right-wing government on their policies. And there's a range of policies which Jack alluded to. Living standards will fall because of the increased costs arising from tariffs and so on. Manufacturing jobs won't return irrespective of the tax policies. There will be some changes, but not significant. So we need to just take them on like you would any right-wing government. But there's a question which I want to ask about the Democratic Party itself. There's two kind of dilemmas which they find themselves in. One is there'll be temptation amongst some of them to move more towards trying to mollify working class opinion and views, but simultaneously they will start to move into the kind of identity politics, anti-woke kind of politics and so on. So they're going to combine a shift to the right with what they would consider to be a shift to the left. All the more reason for people to abandon the Democrats as a party. There's a lot of issues I'd like to raise, but I won't here. The one thing which I'll just mention, which is gaining a lot of traction, is this notion of division between the sexes, male voting one way and female another way. There's been a series of articles in Irish papers here saying the women voted for Harris and the men, particularly young men, voted for Trump, which of course is garbage. Lots of women not just voted for Trump, but were enthusiastic supporters of Trump. Likewise, lots of men voted for Harris. And the division in American society isn't between a right-wing party representing racists and whites, i.e. the Republicans, and a party which the blacks voted for, or black people voted for, Democrats. All this kind of nonsense needs to be shed. But there is a current debate developing about men and women, particularly younger women. We're opposed, as Jack has explained, to identity politics. America is a class-divided society, and the emphasis has to be on class, and the fight against Trump has to be based on class. And our rejection of the Democrats is based on our appreciation of the way class forces operate in society. So I'm interested to hear some of the comments of the American comrades on that. And just one last issue. We were told by the Democrats this is the end of democracy. This will be the last vote you'll ever have in America, which is absolute rubbish. It's not, all the comrades will have come across this kind of stuff. And then the Republicans began to say the same. Trump saying, no, the real threat to democracy is coming from Democrats. They will abolish democracy. And the examples they were using, or the illustrations they were using, were the attempt to prevent Robert Kennedy from standing, the selection of Harris without having to go through a primary process. I mean, these aren't indications of the end of democracy. The issue of fascism, though, has been raised correctly by the comrades. It's not that fascism is around the corner, but fascist forces and right-wing forces right across the globe will be encouraged by the victory of Trump. We mustn't lose sight of that. It's not just an American issue. There'll be a lot of enthusiasm across the right-wing countries in Europe, places such as in Italy, where the brothers of Italy are in power at the moment, under Meloni. They'll be encouraged. Le Pen will be encouraged in France, In Britain, Nigel Farage and the new Reform Party will be encouraged. So the victory of Trump has implications across the globe. And the best way to deal with that, as I just mentioned earlier, is to take on the Republican government as we would any right-wing government. And we have to build, or sorry, American comrades have to build an alternative party. And I'm interested in all the American comrades who wish to speak. How will that process develop? Because it's going to involve existing groups coming together. Now, America is a big place. You can't travel if you're living in California to a meeting in New York that evening, something we can do in England or Ireland. But nonetheless, it has to be organized by a combination of local meetings, local endeavors, Zoom meetings, but it requires leadership. It requires a group of people or organizations coming together now to set and train that process so that perhaps over the course of 12 months, following a series of meetings in all the big centers of the United States, and the specific aim to build an alternative party to the Democrats, not a third party. Apparently, in a recent poll, it was shown there's a majority support in America for a third party, but a third party can mean anything. You can have a right-wing party as a third party or a progressive party. They have a third party, it doesn't matter. What we want to build is an alternative mass party of the workers and our oppressed peoples right across America. Now, some of what I said, I'd like to hear the comments and the views of the American comrades on, and some of them are specific questions.
Thanks, Finn. Would comrades mind if I make a few points really to ask questions? Because I would hope that some of the American comrades, of course, including Jack, will be able to reply. I won't take long. I just want to put a few ideas into the discussion. First of all, I think we have to see the context of Trump's victory. The sharp and rapid decline of the USA, which emerged from the First World War, but even more so from the Second World War, as the leading dominant power in the world, overwhelmingly dominant power, which was of course enhanced still further by the fall and the collapse of the USSR in 1991. So at least for during that time, and as we were reminded by a comrade yesterday, there was some of the wise guys of the ruling class were celebrating the end of history because they thought that capitalism had triumphed and American capitalism had triumphed. We see now the Americans actually have lost every war for the last half a century almost, or every major war that they were involved in. They lost the Vietnam War, they lost the Afghanistan War, they lost the Iraq War because in the end it was Iran that gained the major ascendancy there, and they're now in the process of losing the Ukraine War. And I think that's the so-called isolationism of Trump is to some extent, a reflection of that. The fact that the USA is no longer the dominant power in the world. Of course, behind that is their economic competition with China. They're losing the trade war and they're enhancing a trade war, but that's a sign of the fact that they're being outpaced in terms of trade and in terms of economic development by the massive rise of China. And I think we can see the foreign policy that Trump is putting forward as a kind of tactical difference with the Democrats regarding the attitude to Russia. They're both preparing for a war, for a future world war with China. But the problem is that China has an ally which is armed to the teeth with nuclear weapons. And I think the question is how to neutralize the threat from China's potential ally, Russia, in such a war. And the attitude of the Democrats and of Biden was was to try to defeat it, to drain its resources by the war by the war over Ukraine, and by beefing up NATO right to the very borders of Russia, and taking provocative measures, and sending billions worth of arms in order to try to help to sap the strength of the US of Russia militarily, and the tactical difference that Trump has surely is that he thinks, right, instead of that, let's try to pacify Russia. Let's try to make a deal with Putin. Let's try to get it out of the equation, so that we have a free hand to carry on with the main enemy. I think we also have to think, well, people talk about, there's a lot of talk about fascism. I agree 100% with Finn. It's not that fascism is around the corner. It's not that a fascist regime can be imposed just like that by an electoral victory. The main battles are still to come. It's not. I do think it's not wrong to consider Trump himself as a fascist, or if you like, what Ted Grant used to say about Enoch Powell in those days, a pacemaker for fascism. And that's really, I think, what Finn was talking about too, that it would strengthen and infuse the fascists around the world with the morale to become more aggressive and to more dynamic in their progress. But we do see all over Europe, it's the collapse of the old liberal regime, the collapse of really that whole wing of the ruling class, the rise to power of the hedge funds speculators who become the dominant force in Western capitalism, certainly in Britain, and also to a large extent in the USA. But the it doesn't mean that they can impose fascism. We have far right parties in government in all over the world, and in most of the European countries, and soon perhaps in all of them. But that doesn't mean that they can impose a fascist regime, and I don't think Trump can impose a fascist regime. Winning an election is one thing, but smashing the working class and smashing democratic rights takes a bit more than just votes in the ballot box. And I think the question is that the main battles are still to come. The battle is the war against fascism is not over. We haven't been defeated. It's taken us to a new stage of clearer and more drastic and more immediate conflict. We should remember that not so long ago, Bernie Sanders, who claimed to be a socialist and put forward a program which was really more explicitly left than that of, say, Corbyn in Britain, but he had the support of 13 million people, mainly the youth. It was a complete and utter betrayal on his part that he then caved in and supported Clinton and let down particularly the youth. In opinion polls, something like 50% of youth have said that they favour socialism. They may not be quite clear about what they mean by socialism, but it does show that there are enormous forces which are still, which are still being prodded and provoked, and could well rise to the occasion. We also see that the trade unions seem to be beginning to reawaken with the auto workers strike and other strikes, including of I think of delivery drivers, Amazon workers, fast food workers, and so on. So I'll just finish by just one other point, that we have to remember that one of the signs of the decay of American society is when you look at actually the situation on the ground in the cities and on the streets. It's like the fall of the Roman Empire. We have a completely sick and moribund society. There are 30 million drug addicts in the USA. There are 27 million alcoholics. 100,000 people every year die from drug overdoses. Every day there are 45 to 50 murders. There were in the last count that I could find in 2022, there were 46 school massacres, 46 in 1 year. Every day, 44 children are shot and injured, and 12 children are murdered every day. This is a completely and utterly rotten, putrid society. It is like the fall of the Roman Empire, which just rotted into complete decay and degradation and demoralization. And I think it's in that context that we have to see this victory. I'll be very interested to hear what other comrades think, particularly US comrades. But the next comrade to speak is Dominic. Is it Dominic or John?
John.
John, carry on, please.
Yeah. Yes, it's a few thoughts. And basically, I come back to the fact that the day after the election in America, I watched Al Jazeera, and there was an absolute scathing attack on the Democratic Party on Al Jazeera during the day. The first thing was, the whole theme was that the Democratic Party had become the party of Wall Street, and there were certain facts that were thrown out. I think in the exit polls, which seemed to be in a fairly comprehensive poll of attitudes of people exiting the poll, it turned out that the majority of people earning over $100,000 a year voted Democrat, and the majority earning less than $100,000 a year voted Republican, which is an absolute turning on its head what used to be in America. The Democrats, particularly in the North, represented the working class, and the Republicans represented big business. The other thing that came out was a scathing attack on the fact that the Democratic Party had basically sabotaged Bernie Sanders in his fight against Hillary Clinton. Now, whether or not Bernie Sanders was right or wrong, I think he was wrong, as every comrade has said, in, if you like, succumbing to Hillary Clinton. But Hillary Clinton was described by Al Jazeera as one of the most hated politicians in America. We then have the situation where they went on to say that, if you like, Kamala Harris was foisted on the Democratic Party instead of the Democratic Party having an open contest as to see who they wanted, and particularly Joe Biden foisted, Kamala Harris on the Democrats. The other thing that came out was that you had the situation in America where many people are now paying a third of their income, working class people, on rents. And also part of Trump's campaign is to get rid of the health service, the health service in America. And what do we get from, if you like, Harris? We get endorsements from Taylor Swift, where the Republicans are quick to point out that she's a billionaire and has a private jet and doesn't understand the situation of the working class in America. And two of the issues that came over was that people didn't have enough money to put food on the table and didn't have enough money to put gas in the cars. And these were the themes that, what do you call it? Whatever his name is, Trump was pursuing. And I think, as the comrade from America said, Harris came over as wanting to be a nice person. Well, anybody who wishes to can see on a daily basis the way that the genocide's going on in Israel, Palestine, which is bombing tented cities now and using tanks against them on the basis that there is a Hamas commander somewhere in the middle of that. And if they kill 100 people, well, it was worth it. But Harris spent a whole day in Michigan and never approached Dearborn to even say that she deplored what was going on in Gaza, and to try and say that she would do anything about it if elected. She totally ignored the Arab American community in Michigan, and as comrades have said, that's the biggest area of Arab American settlement in America. And also, one had young Jewish activists saying that if Harris had taken up the atrocities that are going on in Palestine, it would have had a real appeal to Arab Americans. Instead of that, she ignored them. She seemed to be on trammel lines, obeying her paymasters. And I understand one of the biggest paymaster is a Zionist, I presume he's Zionist, any road, in America. And he was more important to the Democratic campaign than the thousands of American Arabs in Michigan. I'll leave it at that, comrades. I mean, it just strikes me that rents are going up, the health service is under attack, and this doesn't seem to have figured anywhere in Harris's campaign. What it was abortion rights, endorsement from celebrities, and basically not really addressing issues facing the working class. So I'll leave it at that, comrades.
All right, thank you, John. Joel, do you want to come back? Is that a legacy hand up?
Yeah, I have my hand up too, Roger.
Oh, okay, Jack, carry on.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, just in terms of what John said, yeah, certainly much of that is true, but there are many different factors. The U.S. is a vast country, and there were many different factors in terms of, different people voting for different ways. I think the clearest thing that comes through is the rejection, of the Democratic Party and cultural elite. In terms of what Roger said about the rot in U.S. society, reminding the fall of the Roman Empire, we have a slow but slowly accelerating unraveling of society, and it's becoming visible. You have interacting climate change, resource limits, drought, war, refugee crisis, gross increase in inequality in the U.S. and elsewhere, but especially the U.S. Capitalism can't solve this. These interact with one another. The climate crisis makes the refugee crisis worse. It makes the drought crisis worse, and then they turn around and interact back with each other. Inequality, war, and so on. War means more refugees. Natural disasters increase with climate change, meaning more people thrown into the streets in the U.S., where housing is a major problem. That increases homelessness and the urban situation. I live in Oakland, one of the more violent cities in the U.S., and there's now a split. The big developers who've been running the city have wanted and have gotten the mayor and the county district attorney recalled, but they were providing, no alternative. To me, it's a battle between, two groups in a situation where there is no real solution under capitalism, and we have to point a road forward by rejecting both the identity politics that have been put forward, by the local leadership in Oakland and elsewhere, and the alternative, of the developers and big capital. So I want to answer a few specific things and give us a few specific instances. People have alluded to Bernie Sanders, Joel, referred to strong statement that Sanders made, where he said that because the Democratic Party has abandoned the working class has abandoned the Democratic Party. Well, there's truth to that, although the question is when the Democratic Party really, it never really was a party of the working class. But Sanders has been a loyal ally and actually, member of that elite. He has proposed, a different, returning to the kind of New Deal approach, and he had a lot of support about it. But he did not only in 2016, go along rather than, carrying forward as many wanted, his own campaign outside the Democrats and breaking with Clinton. But in 2020, Sanders was close to getting the nomination, and the Democratic leadership, at the behest of Capitol, stepped in and organized, took it right out of his hands on the eve of the South Carolina primary, where they got several of the other leading contenders, Amy Klobuchar and Beto O'Rourke and Pete Buttigieg, if you remember them, all to withdraw. This was, orchestrated under the leadership of Jim Clymer, the Democratic Party boss in South Carolina, and they resurrected Joe Biden, whose campaign was even more moribund than Biden himself, and they brought him back in as their representative, as their mouthpiece, because they expect that he will do their bidding, he'll control them, with a deal come in for 4 years. And they took it right out of Sanders' hands. What did Sanders do? He remained loyal. He remained in the Democratic caucus in Congress, and he campaigned for Harris vocally and strongly right up through election day, election eve, when he issued a strong statement on social media on why you should support her and what she's doing for working people and so on. Turns around the next day and says, the working class has abandoned the Democratic Party because the Democratic Party abandoned the working class. He said it's controlled by corporate, political, cultural elites, and he doubts that they'll break with it. Why didn't you say that any time before the day after that? So just in terms of Sanders, yes, I think that that Finn is right, that there will be at the same time an attempt to have more of a social democratic welfare state approach by some of the Democrats, and some pushing an identity politics approach. But I think that we'll continue to see. I don't expect a major shift, and it's certainly not something which we should be putting our selves behind, but rather there is the need to to thoroughly ditch and replace that as an alternative. In terms of what Joel said about the unions only representing 11%, that's true. They do play a strategic role, can leverage much more than that. Roger talked about the Amazon organizing, Starbucks, and so on. That's part of it. They also could play more of a social role in leading other sectors and organizing the unorganized, which they don't. In fact, so I'm going to relate something that happened. I'll try to do it very quickly. In 2008, I was a delegate to the National Convention of the National Education Association, the National Teachers Union, which is the largest union in the U.S. It's the largest so-called democratic meeting in the country. There are almost 10,000 delegates plus staffers. You'll have about 15,000 people there. In 2008, I was a delegate from California with a caucus of about 1,100 delegates, which met every morning at 7 a.m. The day before Obama was scheduled to speak, the leadership, the staff director, Caroline Doggett, and the president, David Sanchez, left the meeting early, excited. They were going to meet Obama's top advisor, David Plouffe. Okay, fast forward to the next morning, 7 a.m. They come in and they are spitting mad. Caroline Doggett says, I don't have words enough to describe that son of a bitch. He told us when we tried to influence Obama's speech on what he would say about education policy. He said, you can take a hike. If you don't like it, leave. We don't need you, you need us. And then Obama, speaking remotely, for the first time, a Democratic Party candidate hadn't come to the convention in the presidential year when they were held in Washington, D.C. Speaking from Montana, Obama said he was for charter schools, good ones. He was for high stakes testing, standardized testing, good tests. He was for merit pay for good teachers and getting rid of the bad ones and failing schools. And that failure would be based on high stakes tests. Those were all the points that he was opposing, all the key points of the NEA and the CTA. And what did they do? Well, there was silence for about 90 seconds after he spoke. And then the conga lines, and the chants resumed. And they fell directly into line. So that's the attitude, of the Labor leadership and of much of it. You do have some breaks now, but really it's the attitude of the Democrats, which is we're orienting towards the urban professionals, to suburbanites, to former Republican voters and the never Trumpers and so on. We're not orienting towards those in need. So I think that was, extremely clear. I want to see if I have any more questions from Finn. I think that's there is one thing, which is people haven't really talked about what Trump has said he will do in any detail. Trump has put forward three main planks for the economy, which are tariffs and deportations, which would supposedly create jobs, and drill baby drill, openly, turning the ecosphere over to fossil fuel. The Democrats, presented very little in a concrete alternative other than they would be nicer and gentler. We see both in this and in the unraveling society, there are two roads which are leading to the same place. They're both going to hell. The difference is on the rate of descent and the choice of vehicle. The Democrats have provided no real alternative on that. But Trump, if he carries through on those policies, and if they cut federal spending by a third, that's going to be vast attacks. I don't actually think, I think there'll be a lot of display behavior, but how much is actually implemented is going to be decided in practice and in struggle, and how much, can be built as an opposition, to these plans. There also will be divisions in the capitalist class. Agribusiness does not want mass deportations. They depend on undocumented workers very heavily in the fields and in meat packing and in canning and so on, food processing. So I think that we're going to see those kind of divisions coming out, and we'll see, I'm not sure how, what'll play out inside of, the Trump leadership, but I do know that the role that we can play is to organize and fight back against it. And I don't want to, I want to return to the point I started with in terms of organizing defense against the right-wing attacks, which Trump enables, and I think are going to be coming. And it's attacks on women, it's immigrant rights. There'll be attacks perhaps on mosques, on synagogues, on lesbian and gay groups, transgender rights, and so on. All of those need to be defended against, not with identity politics, but we need to build a class defense against these things. I think we're going to stop there.
All right, thanks, Jack. Joel.
Okay, yeah, on the role of Sanders that some of us have been talking about, I've seen, he's been a senator from Vermont who proclaims that he is a socialist for some decades now. I wasn't around when he began his activist career, so it's been clear for some decades now that Sanders was never going to try to spearhead or foment or be part of some kind of an independent working class political movement. What the confusion comes about, I think, is the people in particular, like you have the Democratic Socialists of America and the progressive movement in the United States, who keep saying that even if he doesn't win or is nominated, that he still can play this influencer role, which I think is just, it doesn't, he makes some good statements, you know, maybe sometimes it even makes it onto some of the more mainstream, but he doesn't actually do anything outside of his home state of Vermont. So the statement that he did make, what I was saying, it went on actually not only to say that the working class had abandoned the Democratic Party, but the part that I thought was good was he said first it was the white working class, now it's the Black and Latino working class. And at least he made the point that we're not just focusing on these different identity groups, and it had somewhat of a broader class appeal. And it did get some backlash right away. Somebody on Kamala Harris's team condemned him and said, well, we appealed to the labor unions. And that's kind of what I was saying about the unions, is we don't have a broader class appeal for people who are in unions and outside of unions, all in the working class. And then, of course, the unions, you know, they need to organize. You look at my union in particular, the International Longshore and Warehouse Union on the West Coast, we've lost over 50% of the warehouse, which used to be a major component of our membership that could influence politicians in the city of Oakland. We have less and less members that can afford to even live in the immediate area of the port. Moving further out, this affects local politics. We don't have that kind of influence anymore. Nobody gives a damn what the ILW says about this, that, or the other. The warehouses that have come in, you know, Amazon has control of some of them. The older warehouses traditionally that existed around the port, you know, the union has lost those. And I think this is the same in many other industrial unions. You know, I don't have the exact specific details on it, but I'm sure it's very similar to where, I mean, I know in auto, for instance, a lot of the foreign manufacturers coming in the South, non-union, but these people are working class nevertheless. On the unraveling of society, that you know, that's a very good point. And you know, here in California, where housing, there's been a direct link between the price of housing going up triple digits, multipliers every year, and the increase of homeless people. And I can just say, you know, from what I've seen growing up in this city, it's, you know, it's just under every single bridge you see encampments now, you know. And I'll just end by saying how this affects, I think, blue collar workers in the industry I'm in now. This whole issue of automation is, you see this kind of mental health crisis come out, I think, even in the unions. I mean, we've got to the point where we can't even have functional discussions in our union about automation without people saying crazy things about there being a conspiracy. Okay, I'm not even kidding you. You think I'm joking about this? People will get up at union meetings and say there is a conspiracy of 6 people who are linked with environmental groups and sometimes even homosexuals, I'm not kidding you, that are trying to implement automation on blue collar working class families and destroy the family. And that's what this is all about. I am not making this up. And, you know, this leads to a lot of confusion. This is the same with economic issues. When we talk about trade and tariffs, people do not understand, and there is no mechanism for working class people to understand the scientific basis whereupon these things are happening. Automation, climate change, trade and tariff wars. And in the absence of an alternative, they turn to conspiracy theory, which in turn fuels more infighting and dissension and dysfunction. We haven't had a quorum sometimes at our union meetings since COVID because of people just cannot conduct themselves in an orderly way. They shout out, people have to be restrained. It gets bad. I'm going to end it at that.
Okay, thanks, Joel. Is again, Dominic and John, do you want to speak?
It's Dominic. It's just to follow on to an extent from some of the points John was making. But the way I was looking at it with regard to the Democrats and the Republicans, Trump and Harris, at the base of it, there's very little difference between them. Because John referred to the question of, what do you call it, Michigan, where Harris didn't intervene, desperately needed to intervene if they were going to get any of these battleground states, but was so restrained by the capitalists funding her that she couldn't break out of that. It was more important to toe the line with the capitalists than even meet the needs of her own campaign, let alone of the working class. And the same thing with regards to the genocide in Palestine. And also we had a situation where, as I understand it, the Teamsters didn't back Harris's campaign because she was backed by Uber, who were trying to smash the Teamsters in that field. And it's just, you look at it and you say, well, what is the function of the Democrats with regard to the working class? As John said, the poll was, those over 100,000 were the supporters, not those under. So the whole question comes on what the last comrade was saying about the trade union rule. I mean, the point is, I would see it, whichever would have got in, you'd have had a crisis situation with regard to the working class. But Trump, you've certainly got a crisis. And one of the things he said was he was going to stop inflation, or, put a brake on inflation, or some such words. Now, to do that, in the market situation, as I understand it, I'm no economist, but it basically means you put a brake on the profits of the capitalists, or you put a brake on the wages of the workers. And I think we've got a good idea, without me saying anything, which way either of the two parties would have gone on that. So that's going to mean battles in the coming period. Now, that means, as far as the trade union's concerned, that the working class who are not organised will have nowhere else to turn but to the trade unions. It's a natural thing. It's a low road of least resistance, I would say, as far as they're concerned. You're not setting on the road to set up a whole new trade union structure. You've got that, so you're going to use it. And a lot of those workers coming in aren't really concerned about, what's polite, as far as, we can't do this because of the Democrats, we can't do that because of the Democrats. They'll just tell them to bugger off and get on and tackle the question of their conditions or the wages or whatever the issues are. That's going to be their priority. And that's something where we could obviously intervene in. And I think that was basically what I was going to say.
Okay, thanks. Darren. Darren, are you there? Okay, in that case, Darren, we'll call you in after the next speaker. I've got Steve.
Okay, comrades, I think we've discussed before this issue of fascism and the international character, the rise of fascism. I mean, U.S. imperialism is in decline, as everyone knows, and they have no solution, the capitalist class in the United States and internationally, to the crisis of capitalism. So this is, it should be obvious that this rise of fascism is a natural development to the crisis of capitalism at this point. So trade wars and tariffs is a historic action by the capitalists trying to, be more competitive. And the United States is not competitive against China. The Chinese economic system is the United States can't compete with it. That's why there are tariffs not just in the United States, but in Europe and Germany. And we have to say the collapse of the German government right after the election is an example of the crisis that European imperialism is in. Now, I think, first of all, in looking at this political results, we have to focus really on the trade unions in the United States, what they did, because they told the workers that they should support Harris and the Democratic Party. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars. And by the way, $10 billion was spent on the US election by billionaires supporting the Democrats and the Republicans. But the union bureaucracy was united in supporting Harris. That has shown to be bankrupt. And Project 2025, which is a fascist plan for the remodeling of capitalist apparatus, the state apparatus, it will eliminate the right of millions of workers to organize. They want to go back to the 30s. They want to set up company unions. People should look at it. You can get it on the web, Project 2025, and look at the labor section, and you'll get an idea of the plans that they have. There's a fascist movement. We've talked about it in the past, Turning Point USA. Thousands of people are going to be brought into the government. Thousands of fascists are going to be brought into the US government. So for those who think that this is going to be business as usual in US capitalism, that is not the case. So they're going to bring these fascists in relationship to labor. They are going to target the UAW. Sean Fain was a leading critic, labor critic of Trump, and he said Trump is a union buster, a scab, and he crosses picket lines. He's target number one. And the UAW is already under monitorship for past corruption. My view and our view, we've discussed, we're going to have a discussion today, is that they're going to put the UAW in trusteeship, which they can do. Say it's corrupt organization, and they're going to file criminal charges and try to jail Sean Fain, saying that he's corrupt. And there's a group in the UAW and the bureaucracy, the old bureaucracy, administration caucus, which are already trying to get rid of him in this Stellantis. So, and these companies that they beat in the last strike are probably going to, are already saying, screw you, we're going to go into court and fight you. And so you're going to have increased class conflict. And I think that they're going to move, when they do that, to shut down the UAW, they're going to show that as an example, as Reagan did with Patco. When there was a Patco strike, he broke that strike, put the union leadership in jail, and the rest of the union stood by and allowed that to happen. That was a political defeat for labor. So I think that that's what's going to happen in the United States in the immediate term, and they're moving quickly. They have hundreds of executive orders that they're going to issue as soon as they take office on January the 16th that are going to reshape the US government. The NLRB, they're going to put fascists in control of the NLRB. They're going to end union elections. All the union organizing in the United States under the NLRB is going to be shut down. There aren't going to be probably any more union elections under Trump office. So this is a frontal confrontation, not just with blacks and gays and women, but against the organized working class. And the unions are not prepared in the United States. The union bureaucracy don't want a discussion about fascism. There's been no discussion in any unions in the United States on fascism, what fascism is and what to do and how to fight it. So we believe there has to be a campaign to, first of all, talk about what this regime is going to do, 2025, in the working class, and also organize a united front against fascism and fight to prepare for these attacks. I mean, immigrant workers, there has to be a campaign for the unions to organize defense of immigrants against deportation, to take the position they're against mass deportations. The union should be taking this campaign. Now, the union bureaucracy, as I said, does not want to have a debate and discussion. They're paralyzed politically by this defeat. They thought Harris was going to win. So I think that militants, and there is a growing, and we've discussed it in the past, growing militancy in the working class. There are thousands of unionists that are organizing in Amazon, but I think now what's going to happen, that's going to be shut down. So workers have to say, we have to discuss how unions were organized in the 30s by mass action, by surrounding factories, thousands of workers surrounding factories. And I think for the Teamsters with Amazon, they're going to be confronted. There isn't going to be organizing in Amazon because there are going to be no elections. So how are they going to organize workers that want to fight? So this is a growing confrontation. I think that when they try to jail Sean Fain, that will be an opportunity to fight for mass action of the working class. And in the UAW now, there's a debate about fascism. Some comrades have raised this in the UAWD, which is an opposition caucus that they have to prepare for a fascist government and what that means to the UAW. But I think, lastly, the UAW is a union that actually could lead the development of a labor party because of its social weight. And I think Sean Fain, we would support, and we haven't discussed it as an organization, but we're going to discuss it. We would support him running for president, moving to form a labor party and run a president. So when they try to put him in jail, it won't be just Sean Fain. It'll be an attack on the working class, on a labor party movement. I think that's where we have to go politically in focusing the working class on the need to build a political party to defend a program, a working class program. As far as Bernie Sanders still wants to reform the Democratic Party. He was just on this morning. We have to, his argument is the Democratic Party has to become more of a labor focused. It has to take up the issues of working people. But obviously, the coming attack and the growing racist attacks, the growing attack on immigrants is not going to be changed with the Democratic Party. There has to be a political party of the working class. And there are many workers now who are thinking about these issues. What are they going to do? And what should workers do in the face of a fascist movement? And the last point, again, we've discussed before about Musk. There's a large section or a growing section of the capitalist class who are willing to have a fascist government. And Musk and Thiel and these techno-fascists are not only going to support Trump, they will arm fascist gangs. We don't have yet an organized fascist fighting force in the United States, but it's coming. And they will organize and arm fascist gangs to terrorize, to kill organizers, to kill blacks in an organized way, to shut down working class movement. And that's not just in the United States, that's coming in Europe and the rest of the world. That's what we have to be concerned about. That's why we need an international movement, really, against fascism, a united front. And there doesn't exist now, because I don't think most of the left in the United States and globally think, actually, that you can have fascism in the United States. They don't really believe it's possible. And I think they're going to be surprised. And this election has been a shock to many people who think that it's going to be business as usual in the United States. That's it.
There you go. Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Very, very major points, important points. Darren, are you ready now?
Yeah, I am. I found them unmute. That was the problem. So thank you, Roger. Thank you, Jack, and the other US comrades for the analysis, which a lot of it's quite bleak, but I think we're very thankful to be hearing it and discussing it. I think that, there are a lot of parallels with Britain and the US. I think I wanted to ask some questions. I think generally on the theme of opposition from the left or from progressive forces and from young people especially. I mean, what's happening in the US? The anti-war movement here and the anti-genocide movement in Gaza, is a pretty large movement in the UK, and it's still going. It's been going for a year, and it's not showing any signs of winding down yet. And for activists like myself, it's really important because it's as well as just opposing it. It's what's positive is that we are engaging young people in protests. So I'm just wondering, kind of what are the developments with kind of young people in protest? I was aware that there was a large student protest movement in the States, and it's easily kind of disrupted because then they all break up for the summer and they all go their separate ways, and some graduate and then they reconfigure again in the autumn, and much like they do over here. So the rhythms of such protests can be quite fragmented. I'm just wondering if there's signs of that recurring and maybe escalating and taking on a more political expression. And I mean, what of the Democratic Socialists of America? Where are they at the moment? I mean, obviously the setbacks for the Sanders campaign that occurred in 2016 kind of put affected them. But I'm wondering kind of where they are. Are they a spent force? Are they sort of learning from some of the mistakes? What's the situation there? And also, I mean, you were talking about the potential attacks or the potential austerity. I mean, we had, a third of the budget cut. I mean, we've had those. That has been a thing here in the UK for a decade and a half now. I'm just wondering, kind of, what is the state of the public sector unions and their sort of preparedness to fight it here? It's been a mixed bag here. Unison is the largest public sector union, and they, it's probably one of the weakest unions, let's say, and they haven't put up a great fight against it. I mean, some of the other, there've been encouraging signs, particularly the strike wave that happened in 22, 23, and I know you've had sort of strike waves like teachers and other publics, and I believe medical staff, if I remember rightly, at different periods. So there have been signs of a readiness to fight. So I was kind of wondering about some of those things, really. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Darren. Finn, and I think if unless there's other comrades who haven't spoken or want to come in, I think that should probably be the end of the discussion from the floor, because we have to leave Jack some time to reply. So, Finn, over to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to redirect my question. Jack might allude to it as to how would a mass party of the left be built in the United States, a combination of Workers' Party and the people who fight against the system. Now, this will start initially by the comrades themselves. I mean, I'm saying this from the point of view of our own experience here, because we don't have a mass party of the left either, nor is there one in Britain, nor is there one in France. And in Germany, there'll soon be a requirement for such, because the Social Democrats will be badly defeated. Now, Jack referred to demonstrations that were taking place over the last couple of days in New York and Washington. I think it's important that the American comrades would find a way to contact the organizers of that demonstration, and also to contact people such as Steve alluded to in his contribution in the UAW, and to make contact with other similar organizations with a view to forming a coalition of groups. First of all, a coalition against racism, obviously, and a coalition for workers. And that would be a small group of individuals taking initiative, because all things start with individuals ultimately. And a small gathering, now it might well be online, or I'm not sure how it would be done. But the idea would be to get people who are already active, such as the people who organize the demonstration, and try to build something around that. And having built that, it can then expand and develop and gain some publicity and some traction. So I'd like to hear Jack refer to how a party of the left would be built. We're all in agreement it should happen, but what are the first steps? And then just one second comment. I was reading some research recently, which was carried out in Pennsylvania, and the steel industry has disappeared, has gone there, and as a result, the unions have collapsed in terms of membership, and the Democratic vote obviously is a consequence. The collapse of that is a consequence. But one of the interesting things that I came across in the research was that the unions in every town in Pennsylvania had a headquarters, and the headquarters was a center for the community in the towns. And people went to the clubs and the union clubs for a drink, for family events, for weddings, for receptions, for meetings. And the union hall became a focus of communal activity. And with the collapse of the industries and consequently the disappearance of the union membership, such social events no longer happen. But what is significant is the National Rifle Association, for example, formed clubs around the towns where previously people came to the union headquarters. Now a lot of people now going to the events, social events, having a few drinks, meeting up socially, holding family events in the headquarters of the National Rifle Association, plus some Christian associations. So the disappearance of the union, which is a consequence of the disappearance of industry, has implications also for the communities in which the workers were. And it was almost a given that the workers of Pennsylvania are all voting Democrat because they're all union members. Now the majority, as we can see, in Pennsylvania of workers, of union members, are now voting for, or they have voted for Trump. And I'd like to hear a comment about the connection between the unions and the local community. But principally, my first question, how will this mass party of the left, which we all are in agreement about the necessity to form it, what are the first steps that comrades can take in that direction?
Okay, if there's nobody else who wants to speak, welcome Jack back again.
Okay, so to what Finn said, yeah, I think that, such coalitions that you've outlined, from the ground up, especially, are very important. I think we're a fair way away from such a party, but things can accelerate. I'm going to say again what I began with, which I think that being prepared for the attacks that are going to come on the ground locally is very important. And part of, I think, an important part of building a coalition is to prepare and build those defenses and to participate in defense against the attacks that are coming from right-wing and proto-fascist forces. Steve is right that people like Musk will arm, reaction, but that's not going to happen immediately, I don't think. I don't know what the timetable is. I tend to think, that is going to something that doesn't happen by snapping fingers. And the more that there's a fight back against it, the better prepared we are, and to make links. So it's organizers of of big demonstrations, but it's participants in those demonstrations and local defense, I think, are critical. And then going to unions and taking up the need, to fight on the local level and linking up on a national level. So I think that what Steve is talking about is great to the degree that it can happen. I think that we are not in a great position for it happening. I hope Sean Fain continues to stand up, but I do remember that only a few months ago, he stood up at the Democratic convention to take, he stood up at Biden's State of the Union address, to take bows. So I think we better be careful. And he may be, and the UAW may be, something that, that can be counted on. And there's not much else, frankly, to look at, in labor now. So I'm not, scoffing at that, but I think that, we have a tough row and a long row to hoe and not that much time never about that. So I do think that building from the ground up, is going to be, extremely important. I want to point out, one thing which I didn't about the Democrats. I mentioned how the NEA leadership, the CTA leadership, the California State Teachers Association leadership went to meet with Obama's top advisor, and he told him to take a hike. That was David Plouffe. David Plouffe became a big executive in Uber, for a time the CEO of Uber, and is now was a top advisor in the Harris campaign. So I think that that role should be very clear. I'd like to be able to say, well, here's a way that we can immediately go poof and be able to have mass demonstrations and a mass party. I think we're far from it. DSA, overwhelmingly, are supporting and looking to rebuild Democratic Party. Can't look to them. You can look to individuals inside and try to split, that, but that's, that's where they stand. I don't want to minimize, the danger of fascism. When Hitler, initially came to power, that was minimized. The much of the German bourgeoisie said, well, we'll use them, against, the SPD and the KPD and the unions and throw them away after a year. That's not what happened. Things can happen, very quickly. I don't want to minimize that, But a lot of what happens depends. There are going to be splits. There already are divisions in the capitalist class, which be reflected among Trump supporters. And what we do on the ground, can have an enormous, impact in fighting back against it, directly. And I think that, the struggle from the ground up, is critical. Much of what I think, Steve was raising is at this point propagandistic rather than agitational. Hopefully, there can be agitation. I think much of it is education. And there's not, I understand it's a late, date, but I'm afraid that, it's going to be a protracted struggle. And it may be that you have, the harshest measures, the Project 2025 and so on, put in place. That's going to make it even more difficult to fight. And I think that right now, between now and Inauguration Day, there's going to be an opportunity to fight back against attacks that are going to be beginning and to build something, to be prepared for the worst that can happen, right? After the inauguration, right after he directly takes power. Okay, I'm going to stop there.
Okay, listen, I think it's been a really good discussion today in the best traditions of WIN. Thank you very much to all the comrades who participated. Thank you to Jack for his lead off and his summing up. As comrades know, we meet every week. We're still trying to determine the topic for next week, but you're all on the mailing list, and you will hear within the next 2 or 3 days. But I'd like to say one thing, that we've managed over the last 5 years to find speakers from the front line of struggles around the world week after week, almost without a break. We do, we would welcome suggestions from comrades or offers or actually for comrades to volunteer if they feel that they could make a contribution which would be useful to us. I'm sure you all have, comrades, rich experience of workers' struggles, so please don't hesitate to volunteer or to suggest any topics and any speakers. As I say, you will get from the emails, you get notification of what we managed to come up with for next week. There's no shortage of issues which desperately need discussion and the kind of the kind of attention that we've been giving to the situation in the USA today. So thank you, comrades, and see you next week.
Thanks, Roger.
Thank you, Roger.
Thanks.